Hey, this is John from PowerYourself.com. I wanted to show you this will be part one of the series on how to weld up the 20 gauge stainless steel sheet metal, especially along this longitudinal seam. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and show you all the parts, all the different things you'll need in order to do this. If you can see here, there's two sawhorses connected by this 1-inch piece of square tubing that's been welded to two C-clamps. These C-clamps have been fixed to these sawhorses, making a fairly rigid structure here that won't really want to tip over. And then you'll also need a piece of 1-inch by, it looks like maybe a 1/4 inch thick aluminum, and this will be kind of your heat sink for the back side of the weld. It'll also help support the back side of the weld from falling out on you. And in addition, you'll need a bunch of clamps. Previously on the larger ones where I was able to use these needle nose vice grips to clamp to the edges over here, that worked fairly well. But in the future, since I'm going to be doing the shorter one where it's only going to sit about that far on this fixture, I'll probably have to use bigger clamps. So I'll show you that when we get to it. But I guess we'll do the first part. And the first part of any successful weld is to go ahead and clean your weld area. You got to prep it. I peeled back this plastic, and I went ahead and clean it with I have here this is just a rag, but it's a lint-free rag. You get these at Lowe's or whatever, and so that you don't leave a bunch of cloth fibers on the surface. Because what happens is when after you like plasma cut or whatever you do, however you cut the metal, sometimes there's burrs left on the edge, and with plasma cutting you actually have to come back and grind what's called the recast layer, which is just a little thin layer of hard metal that's left. It's like where the metal melts and then solidifies, but it's not the same as the parent metal, and if you try to weld, it just really won't work for you. So let's see if I can get this off here. So we'll go ahead and, this is just regular denatured alcohol. Got this at Lowe's. And you just want to go ahead and wipe down your seam, both sides. So clean in here. Clean this pretty good. You want to do the back side. Clean that. Same thing over here. Now I had already cleaned this a little bit, so you want to really make sure that you get all the grease off. And the back side of this. And then what I like to do is find a new place on the towel. It's not really dirty, although this towel's getting kind of dirty. Go ahead and add some more, and just run it right down the inside edge of your weld. Make sure that's nice and clean. This will help get better penetration, allow the molten metal to flow to the back side of the weld. So that's what I do there. And that dries almost immediately, even down here in Florida where it's pretty humid all the time. So then the next step is to prepare your flux. Let me step over here, grab my flux. Now you're supposed to use clean flux every time. Well, I found that I'm just not that dirty out here, and the flux that I have, it dries up in the thing, and it cakes on the bottom, and I'll just scrape it off the bottom. You can see that's a good amount of flux. I'm not wasting that flux. So get ahead and just scrape it, and then I get my ethanol. See, this is just a stainless steel acid brush, and I trimmed the bristles so that they were flat and stiff, so that when I apply it, I don't need to waste a lot of flux. So these brushes are cheap. You buy these for like soldering or whatever over at Lowe's. You just add some ethanol, or you can add isopropyl alcohol. They say the best is methanol, but this works fine. And you really want it to be kind of a thick, creamy consistency. This is definitely too much. It's too watery right now, but it's a little colder today, and how fast this evaporates, this will thicken up real quick. You'll see. You always want to start, I found, on the waterier side, because otherwise halfway through applying the flux, you're going to have to, add more ethanol. Right now I'm just trying to scrape some of the extra off the sides to thicken it up a little bit and speed that process up so I can show you how when it pastes on, what it looks like. You can already see that the amount of ethanol there is getting, you can already see it's getting mixed up better and getting thicker. They say you want it the consistency of whole milk, which we're not too far off of that. But let me go ahead and just start pasting on. So what I do is I only put this on the back side of the weld. And the purpose of this, spin this around for you. The purpose of this is, now if you notice, I just touched the seam there. You don't want to do that. You get oils and dirt on your hands and your fingers. And if you touch the seam of the weld, you got to go back and you got to clean it again. You don't want to mix that stuff up into your welds. So what I'm going to do is just get a good amount of flux on there. And I start at the bottom and just kind of rub it up and down on the edge of the panel. And then reflux. And go ahead and I'll show you, don't worry if you can't see it right now. I'll show you it once, we'll zoom in on it once I'm done here. But basically that's all I'm doing. You can see I just go up and down the back side of the panel so I get a nice coating of this. It's like a grayish, and then it'll dry to more of a white. You do want to lift the panel and get it all the way to the bottom so you really completely cover it. Same thing here, and don't worry if you get too much on. No, you'll get this off. You have to remove this. This is corrosive. Oh, let me show you real quick. I don't know if you can see that, but this is really getting thicker already. I found though it's a little bit easier to spread if it's on the thinner side. Like whole milk is probably a pretty good adjective to describe how thick it is. Just spin this around and check, make sure you have a good view of that. So I really want you to see how I apply this. Let me zoom in and refocus on over here. See if I can get you a good shot of that. It is really important that you can see that. Let me go ahead and apply some more flux. So you can see I just do it about a 1/2 inch from the edge, just painting on, and then when it starts to thin, let's go back and get some more. And this stuff is really what I found to work the best. I have some heat tape, and it has like a ceramic fiber to help protect the back side of the weld and support it, but I haven't tried it yet, and this has worked so well that I'm just going to finish all these seams and use that heat tape to do the flanges when it's like around this edge. It's much harder to come up with a backing piece. So you can see once I did the whole, both sides, right, painted with flux, I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more flux to my brush, and I'm just going to run it right up the seam to get it on that inside edge. Right up. So I want to paint the seam of the weld right on the edge with the flux. And I found that to help also get backside penetration. Now, I applied the flux and you think, all right, he might be done, but you actually, I've found that after you fix it up and you tack it, you got to allow the thing to roll a little bit and paint flux on the back of it again, because you basically use up the flux wherever you tack at the little spots, and then when you try to weld through it, it gets brittle and you don't get good penetration and it looks like garbage. So so every time after you weld, you got to stop and tack. Even after you start doing the stitch welds, I basically just go from one tack to the next and then skip a space and then go from one tack to the next and then go ahead and repaint the flux on and then just fill in the gaps. I'll show you more later if you don't. That doesn't make much sense. Let me go ahead and zoom this back out, and then we'll see if we can get this thing fixtured up here. Now, I'm going to rotate that and see if I can give you a good idea of how to fix this. So this was one of the more tricky aspects. Basically, this aluminum bar is the main reason why this whole thing works. Without that, welding this is almost impossible. So what we're going to do is we're going to roll that on its side, bring it up, peel it around, and then clamp it down. So give me 1 second here. Let's get this clamp. So I'm going to use this. This is a bigger welding clamp, and it'll be able to go around the entire outside of this. Plus it's got like kind of this edge that it might pinch both sides of the cylinder, although I found that that's very difficult to do at one time because it never wants to do that. It always wants to. What I'm doing now is I'm just setting it so that I can actually clamp down on something when I pick it up. Now don't worry too much about smearing the flux. I have found that that didn't matter a whole bunch. So what I do is I just set it up there right on the side, like that, and then come in and clamp it down. And then the same thing with the other side. Now I was all set up with all my clamps for the video, and then I realized that previously I was running 4-foot, these tall ones. You can see this back here. When I was welding these, it went all the way to the edge, so I could just clamp over here on the edge. But now I need these bigger clamps to go ahead and take this up. So what I'm going to do, put that in there a little bit tighter. And this, if it looks like I'm having a hard time, it's because I'm taking my time. You really have to spend the time to make sure that this is fitted up right. If your edges, so then I just roll this around. If your edges don't line up perfectly, your welds, it's so much harder to weld. You will save yourself such a heartache by just, so see how I loosen real easy, and then slide that clamp over just a little bit to pinch both sides. And then this is what, and I'll do the same thing over here. Let me stand over this way so you can see. Basically, I need to stand there so I hold my knee up against it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prop my knee, pinch this in, and then undo the clamp very lightly, and see how it wants to slide out because it's under tension. You're forcing it into the cylinder. Okay, so you can see this one. It wants to separate right here at the center. And actually, to tell you the truth, this is the first time that's happened. Most of them have fit more flat than this, but it could be because this one is hanging. So I have seen it where some of the bigger ones, you see I might need now, when this happens, when the clamps aren't wanting to hold both sides, what you have to do is you actually have to go and get another clamp. Yeah. So I'm going to go ahead and put this clamp in, the one that I had, and I'm purposely going to let you see this. I'm going to show you what a struggle it is to get this fixtured up. But then I'll show you how easy it is to weld once it's up in place. So let me go ahead and run over here and grab some more clamps. And still quite a large gap here, and it's not really, instead of the cylinder being tangent, these two aren't really. What needs to happen is it needs to be lifted up and forced in, kind of like that. And so now what I'm going to do is I like to go ahead and just go ahead and get a hammer. I got some body hammers here. This one. Go ahead and tap this. Make sure the seam is as close as possible right here. This is like the most critical part. You don't want to, you can get away with no gap, that's what you want. You don't want any gap in the seam. And go ahead and bring the camera over and show you. Alright. Turn me over. Camera. Gap here is really not acceptable. How can you ever weld that? Even if you held it in, it's going to be pretty tough. So what I'm going to do is I might get a strap, such as a tie-down strap or something from a truck. I got this red strap here, the buffer. And I use this on some of the larger ones that won't stay together. But what you basically do is you just wrap it around like a belly band. Right? And it's not. This one is pretty long, so wrap it around a couple times. This is going to do is it's going to help make the cylinder round, so that when you go ahead and weld, one edge is tangent to the other edge, which will be important to make sure that this thing actually comes out cylindrical. There's kind of a bend in it. Tighten this up. And the tighter I make this, the more cylindrical it's going to get, the better that seam's going to fit together. And this is a much thinner, or a much smaller cylinder than what I did before, so it's probably more difficult to tighten. But let me go ahead and sit down here. I'm just going to buckle this. I happen to end up on the bottom instead of the top. And pull this. Let's see what we can do. Can't see it up there, so it might take a few tries to tighten it. See if something can work. Let me try. Getting rid of one of these wraps, giving myself more leverage on pulling this strap. Do here. Just do it around once. Just pull it as tight as you can, like Velcro. Hopefully that'll hold. Get a weld in there, and then we obviously can't leave that while we're welding. Ah, there we go. Right. But we can leave it there while we're tackling. That's not really going to work. Okay, well, I guess you'll get to watch me tack weld with a different technique then. So there is one other option that we could do to try to eliminate this. Basically what that is when you tack weld, you set your torch up in a special way such that when you put the cup right down on top, and you push the two together and then you spark it. And that's basically how you do it. You can't get it to stay together. And you can also get some Jorgensen clamps, like long clamps, that'll be able to reach in there and pinch that down. That would probably be a better way, but I don't have any long clamps. And so I'm going to get stuck with doing it this way, which is not a big deal. Another option is you get in here with this sort of clamp, like big AC clamp, and this will reach in a little bit further than those other clamps. So this is also something good that I'll probably do to help try to keep this thing together as far in as possible. And gonna go ahead and stop this now. I'm gonna go find another clamp and see if I can get a long clamp in here and just clamp this down as opposed to using that other forge technique. Because you can see how this is now tangent and it's a nice straight seam. So that'll make a